So, Bob, it was your birthday recently, and as a gift to you, I decided to beat you at 13, the card game that we play. Normally, you win all the time. I've been keeping track of our collective scores, and even though I was up by 8 on Saturday, you're still up by 10 overall since I started keeping track a few years ago. So, happy birthday to you for that. How did it feel receiving that gift?
Yeah, I didn't realize it was 8. Did you notice my hands hurt from shuffling cards? I don't know what's happening to me. I'm getting old. Yeah. Anyways, in terms of the thrashing you offered me, I've had better birthday presents.
Normally, you are thrashing me, so this was a bit of a regression to the mean. But
yeah, right. That's right.
But if this is a repeat of the past, for the next 5 outings we have, you will shellac me, because that's usually what happens.
Oh, well.
Let's answer some emails. This email's from an anonymous patron. She says, "Hi, Kirk and Bob. I just listened to your episode on erotic transference. I used to experience intense erotic transference with my therapist, but thankfully the situation has been much better these days. What frustrates me, however, is that these erotic feelings don't just occur within the therapy room. They often extend to interactions within other male authority figures in my life. You've mentioned that these feelings might stem from unmet attachment needs, but in my case, I notice an underlying sense of fear alongside the erotic feelings. It feels almost like an attempt to react to some kind of sexual trauma that I don't consciously remember. Could this be a trauma response, or might it be connected to a disorganized attachment style? Does treatment differ depending on underlying causes of erotic transference? Thank you both. I love your podcast." Bob, what do you think?
I don't know. Let's see. There was a lot asked there. The one question was, is it because of sexual trauma in my history that I don't remember?
Right. She's saying that she has erotic feelings with her therapist and with other male authority figures.
Right.
But there's also a sense of fear.
Right.
So first off, does that sound strange?
No, it doesn't sound strange to me at all. Maybe there was a scary parent. Who knows? Mm-hmm. You know, just because there are erotic feelings does not necessarily mean there's sexual trauma. There may or may not be. I mean, I don't know. But it isn't by itself an indicator that there's sexual trauma as far as I know.
Right. I mean, there's a possibility of sexual trauma prior to memories being formed.
Yeah.
Like when one is 0 to 3 or something, or even later than that when memories are not as easily recalled. But generally speaking, as a therapist, when I run into situations like this, that's not my assumption. I can never know. We can never know if that's in someone's history. But fear, I understand the association. You think, well, there's erotic, there's male authority,
right?
There's fear. It doesn't take a genius to imagine if you were sexually abused by your dad or an uncle or something. But there's a lot of reasons why we have erotic transference and fear. You know, it's much more common to have an attachment figure, a parent who is scary in some way, either because of anger or even just that they're just not there. They're not available emotionally. And as a result, children are just in a state of fear because they're left alone, right? Or they don't see their father enough, and so they're not really familiar with their father, or they see their father stressed out, and that makes the kid afraid. You know, there's a lot of reasons why a kid would feel afraid. And erotic transference isn't a direct result, or I should say, when someone has erotic transference, there's a lot of possible factors, one of which can be that there's sexual trauma of some sort growing up, or some sexual theme to one's attachment injuries. But that, again, isn't my assumption. My assumption is that, or the top hypothesis with erotic transference is that as a child, there wasn't enough attunement. And as an adult, when a authority figure or someone that can provide a secure base, like a therapist or a boss or something, then a lot of feelings come pouring out. And as an adult, sexuality gets kind of swept up in it. We have the attachment, orientation towards the person, interest in the person, a crush on the person, an obsession with the person, a preference for the person, and along the way, sexuality just kind of gets swept up in the mess, because as adults, there's sexuality needs as well that aren't necessarily there, or at least in the same way when we're young. And so, that's the way that I see it. And fear probably always, to some extent, accompanies this, because erotic transference, we don't transfer anything out of positivity, So there has to be fear and or pain involved in the transference, whether it's erotic or not. And so for someone that has erotic transference, and as they are desperately trying to meet a need that they've never had met before by transferring, of course, there's a massive fear in that, in that the individual's thinking, will this person harm me, or will this person abandon me? Will this person not be there for me? You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. What was the question? Well, what else was there? There was more to this email. What didn't we get yet?
Let's see. Might it be connected to a disorganized attachment style?
Yeah, it could. I mean, I know that's a dissatisfying answer, because a person would like that, but yes, it could. It could also be an anxious. It could be avoidant. It could be, and I think it's, as you say, though, there's some kind of transferential thing that's wanting to be worked out, and it's just coming up in this particular way. And I think the reason maybe we're talking about it is because everybody in the world is uncomfortable when it comes to sex, and we're all kind of scared of it and kind of weirded out by it. But as you were talking, I was reminded of this story my very first therapist told me. She was in a women's group, and she was hanging out with one of the women in the group one day, and she had 2 kids, and the other person had a kid, and the kids were all like, 3 and 4 years old, like little tigers, right? So they tossed him in the bath because they needed to get a bath. So they tossed him in the bath. One of them was this little boy, and he gets a hard on, and he's sort of humping I ever tell you this? He's sort of humping the spigot. The water's coming out of the bath, and he's
I vaguely remember.
Yeah, and he's got a little hard on going, and he's just smiling and enjoying himself, right? And they didn't do anything. They didn't shame him. They didn't even comment about it, as far as I know. They just let him go, and he's just doing what his body's made to do. And the only reason that story is kind of, to half my brain, it's like, yeah, that's the way we're made. And the other half of my brain is like, ooh, ick, uh-oh, because my growing up life, anything erotic or sexual was just either ignored, and, by its being ignored, there's an element of shame that's imprinted on me, or just discouraged. But I don't recall my parents actively doing much of anything one way or the other when it came to sex. So my brain just fills in the blanks with that. So anyways, let's see. Why is that coming to mind? Because
well, let me ask you about that.
Sure.
So when you hear a story like that, someone's just talking about someone else and themselves, and you're just a witness or listening or something, meaning that it doesn't involve you. You weren't the little boy. You weren't there watching the kid. You're not being asked to approve or disapprove. They're not turning to you and say, what do we do about this? Why do you get fused or connected to it? And not you, but why do we? Because in essence, it's an event that has literally nothing to do with you. You're not being asked anything. But I think that there's an element here that contributes to throwing people like you into a state of panic. Because you contribute it to the shame and whatnot that you went through, which of course is an element. But what else is going on there? What compels you as a complete third-party outsider that throws you into a state of panic? What's the fear? What's the compulsion?
The way I pictured in my head is, what if it was me, and I'm 4 or 5, and what would happen if I were doing that?
Okay.
And I don't go any further than that. It's sort of like, just my uh-oh goes off inside.
It just puts you in the shoes of the boy.
Yeah.
Or there's a part of you that is the boy that has those impulses currently, some kind of urge, or and so it exposes you in that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was also wondering if there's another element of emergent need to display that you are disgusted or something by it, like there's a signaling. Because again, you're a third party. You're not involved. You're not being asked. And I wonder if children in your scenario are punished for hearing about others. There's the direct shaming of you and just sexuality. But I also wonder if there's like a Catholic kind of call to arms that if you don't rise up against the sin and show your purity or something, then you also will be smote. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean, and I'm thinking about it in these ways, and I'm imagining if I'm the boy, what's my valence to the adults in the room, and I'm afraid of getting punished.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about the I better disparage it or I'm going to get smote. I'll have to think about that because I'm not willing to say, no, that's not it, but I'm not willing to say yes either. I'm just willing to chew on it, and it's sort of provocative. So I think, okay, well, that's worth considering. It's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But so
because by not saying something, by not signaling something, and I think this is true for everyone, not just you, but I think that by not displaying, like if I were to hear a story like this, I would feel to some extent a need to, I would have an awareness that whatever I signal, whether it be to speak out against it or to be sex positive or to do nothing, communicate something about how I'm processing it, which
of course
I would worry or be concerned about people drawing conclusions from that. So it would, even though I might be across the room among 10 other people that are listening to a story and I'm not being asked to chime in, there would be this compulsion of, I better signal something. And if I don't signal something, I'm signaling something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Yeah.
And what a fuck job on your mind,
Yeah. That old Catholic joke, Jesus is coming, look busy.
Does treatment differ depending on the underlying causes of erotic transference?
No, I don't think so. The only thing that might make it different was if I had a memory of some kind of sexual event and the memory was causing me anxiety or panic, then I might do, targeted, sometimes they'll do EMDR, sometimes they'll do prolonged exposure, they do that cognitive processing, right? I might do something directly related to that so that I could settle my panic. But I think other than that, it's just going to be straight psychotherapy.
Yeah. And I think another way of answering that is, I'm sure that you would agree with that every client with erotic transference is different and has a different flavor of trauma. And so the corrective experience is going to be tailored to the needs of the client.
Right.
But the general approach of psychotherapy would be the same. Okay, let's take a break. We get back. Another email. What do you say?
Yeah.
So for the listeners, how would you describe our favorite card game, 13?
13. It's super fun. I learned it from you. Apparently.
I learned it from a client, an Asian client.
Right. It's a Vietnamese game, right?
I think so.
Yeah. There are a couple apps out there that I don't have one anymore, but there are a couple apps out there where you can play it, on your device or whatever. Super fun and kind of fun with 4 people, right? And it's different with 2 people, but
yeah, it's kind of like gin rummy or gin or kings. Everyone is given 13 cards, and you're trying to get rid of them. Can
you imagine having 2 busters and a 2, and you get to lead?
Right.
And you play a 2, and then you bust your 2, and then you bust your 2 buster.
That's all 13 cards right there, because that's 12, 12, 1.
And you know what that means, don't you?
Well, that would be a hand job hand. Annual long-term anonymous patron, she says, "Hi, my favorite podcasters.
Oh.
Out of all the famous psychologists and psychotherapists, living or dead, who would you like to interview the most apart from Freud? What questions would you ask them?" End of email. Bob, what do you think?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Irv Yalom, for sure. Carl Rogers, without question. He'd be just a lovely person to talk to.
What questions would you ask?
How you doing? What's your favorite thing about therapy? I saw you in that movie. You were really great. Like, you remember that movie? The one he did with, he does a client session with the lady, and then they trade him up. Right, he did 2 of those. She did not like Albert Ellis, and I can't remember who the guy was that actually
Fritz Perls.
Oh, was he the guy that organized the thing?
Oh, I don't know. I think Carl Rogers organized it.
Well, there were 2 that I saw. One where
there's-
Carl Rogers he's younger and he's wearing a really skinny tie, and then one where he's a little bit older and it's a wider tie. So I'm thinking the 70s.
Yeah, I think the one I'm thinking of is that second. I mean, the Gloria tapes are the second
Gloria,
one.
yeah.
And
Fritz Perls he was one of the therapists.
yeah, and she chose Fritz Perls to work with after, and then regretted it later.
Yeah, I can see that.
and said she wished she had chosen Carl Rogers.
Very, yeah. So him, my current therapy crush, Stan Tatkin, who I get to meet in August because he's having a training down California. I'm going to go. And maybe James Masterson. That'd be cool. Carl Jung.
Why James Masterson?
American Psycho, what do they call it? American Object Relations. And I read his book, and it's interesting stuff, and I'd just like to talk to him about it.
Yeah, he's one of the main authors that have written in the past 30 years.
Yeah. He's pretty new, I guess. I mean, he's dead, but yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Anybody else? I said Jung. I'm not allowed to say Freud, though I totally would want to talk to Freud.
Why Jung?
Oh, that archetype stuff. It's kind of, I don't know if it's real, but it's interesting. Like it's just interesting. And I guess that's probably it.
For me, it would be Sandor Ferenczi, because when I read his writing, even though it comes from the same time as Freud was emerging, Ferenczi was one of Freud's first students, and Ferenczi's writing is very familiar and relatable to me.
Oh.
He seemed like a very real guy, and I would be curious about how he saw clients, because that was a thing about those early authors and theorists, is that they spent hours and hours and hours a week just working with clients and thinking and talking amongst themselves. They were true therapists, because there wasn't an academic research industry at the time, and they had it was like informal. It was almost like a book club that they had. There was no organization, there was no profession. They were just psychiatrists who did this thing that people didn't really know about on the side. And they were making it up as they were going along, and every discovery, the first time they come across someone with paranoid personality, they don't have a word for it. And so it's all just observation, and they're not tainted with education or with preconceived notions or with culture. They're just starting from scratch, and their observations are pure in that way and astute and backed up with like lots of data about these clients. They really thought about things. And it was also at a time when philosophy and thought and discourse was perhaps in a different way more valued or something. Certainly today that is true to some extent, but today people get real bogged down in classification. Is it this? Is it that? And other kinds of influences that I think mess up the important emphasis of what we do, which is philosophy and self-reflection and really listening to people. Another person is Karen Horney, because she also was from back then, a little later, but also had a pure kind of view and lots of great observations, but had a finger on the pulse of oppression and sexism and racism and other kinds of social problems. And she was speaking in a room of people that didn't really consider that to be important, And so I'd be curious as to what she saw. But anyway, another email here. Anonymous listener, he says, I have been on a few dates with a couple of different therapists at the end of their grad program. I've been on a few dates with a couple of different therapists at the end of their grad program. Okay. Both of them have talked about how they actually don't care about their clients. Also, just chiming in here, Bob, what do you think about that one?
It's a turnoff.
Yeah.
I did know somebody that we went to school with who had a very shockingly similar attitude.
How was it communicated, though?
What they said was their client came in and they were dressed in sweatpants, and that was clearly an indication that the client had given up. But they said it in a way that was sort of dismissive, and yeah, I know that. No.
Yeah, yikes.
Yeah, yikes.
There's so many. It's like, where do you begin with that?
Yeah.
Like, one, you're a therapist. Stop just judging books by the cover.
Right. Like there's a reason somebody's coming. So if the sweatpants are an indicator of something, then that's what you're working with.
Yeah, that's your fucking job.
Yeah.
If they've given up, then
help them find a reason to live, if that's
Right.
what it is. I mean, I don't even know if that's true. It seems so dismissive. There's not
Right.
much curiosity in it. So
yeah, right. That's what I say. It's like, where do you begin?
Yeah.
One, stop judging. Two, you're using cultural like memes as a way of diagnosing. Three, if true, as you say, then that's your job.
what are you taking money for, right?
Yeah, it's just like an ER doc going like, yeah, someone came in and they were bleeding. I mean, it's just like, Jesus Christ, go to a doctor. Like, why are you getting blood all over my hospital? Right. Like, gross. He was like, wait, yeah. So I think that's a problem, obviously.
Yeah, I do too.
But I also just wonder if this individual is interpreting these different therapists as not actually caring about their clients when they do. That's not a stretch to imagine someone dating someone and the dates don't go particularly well, and the individual, the anonymous listener, walks away, just kind of feeling like the empathy just wasn't really there.
Could be.
Yeah. Because, I could also see a scenario where if you talked, and, maybe sometimes people even talking to us back then or even now would potentially walk away with that distortion if they were misinterpreting or looking for something to criticize. That if they had a stereotype of therapists constantly walking around like having just saturated empathy dripping off of them, like, oh, I just had the most wonderful day just listening to people and all my clients, I just love them so much. Like, if you had anything aside from that, then it would be perceived as you don't really care.
Don't really care.
Yeah, I don't know.
Could
going
be.
on. Also, they've been super judgmental of others and surprisingly awful at conflict resolution. One demonstrated near delusional behavior and picked fights with several strangers for no reason. Bob, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it could happen.
Yeah.
Like therapists are people too, and people that are drawn to learning to be therapists often have their own pathology, and so maybe that person's just acting out something. I'm not saying that that's going to make them a bad therapist or a good therapist or even just a easy human to get along with, but
Right.
everybody's fucked up to some degree, right?
Yeah, right. And one thing to note is that they're at the end of their program, which makes it potentially, it's more likely to find a bad therapist at the end of their grad program than 20 years into the profession, because I guess presumably the bad therapists or the people who aren't a good match for the profession will bow out of the profession sooner than later, and they wouldn't know that until they were in the end of their program,
Oh, that sounds like Sandra Lippincott said that one thing. She's like, good training won't make a bad therapist better, but it will make a good therapist better. Good training will help. I don't think much of my skill as a therapist. I mean, come on, man. I was just fresh out of grad school. I was 20. How old was I? I was 28 or 9 when we got out of school. So, yeah, I mean, that's so young and don't know nothing and don't have no experience with any of it. So if I could look back and think, I look back and I think about some of the things the way I thought about it and some things that I said or did when I was a young therapist, and, not particularly skilled, really green, clumsy, wrong, inaccurate. I never feel good thinking about that stuff. and I'm grateful to have gotten training. And I think, though I don't know if it's true, in 25 years, when I'm, maybe at the tail end of my career, I guess, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll probably look back on now and say, oh yeah, you had some growing up to do.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling to look back at those early years. I have a similar sense that I had no idea what I was doing, and I probably was overly confident in some ways and not confident enough in a lot of ways. Didn't know what I didn't know. So I tend to see that early work, even just like 15, 20 years ago, as probably not being the best therapy. But I have recordings from back then that look otherwise.
Hey,
so
all right.
I think that, and I'm sure it's true for you too, that, you didn't know you didn't know, and you had some I don't know, some dogmatic things rattling around your head about CBT or whatever. But it's impossible that your vibe was that different. You were, and always have been, a true therapist who listens. So I think it's both, but I think 90% of what you are now, what was present back then, and for me too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We might have had some off interpretations. We might have not seen something the way we see it now, and therefore we would say now that we didn't really understand it.
Right.
But our listening, our vibe, our care, our empathy, and probably even a lot of our skill, a lot of our interpretation was also on the mark, or today we would look back and see it as not being atrocious.
Yeah.
I think for you and me, I don't know if it's just a part of our personality to look back and think that we were idiots, or to highlight like certain cringe, sort of a perfectionism.
I definitely do that
streak of like, I definitely know that I didn't know things back then, and therefore that's a fly in the ointment that ruins the entire vat. When in reality, I'm pretty sure you and I, early on, I mean, maybe it took a little bit, maybe it was 6 months after graduation or something, but I'm going to take a guess and say that you and I were doing good work back then. So there's that. As evidenced by the clients that wanted to work with us, you and I had pretty good retention rates and felt good about what we were doing. So
That's true.
And do you think you were that different as a listener back then?
Well, I mean,
like your vibe?
no, I don't think my vibe was different, but I think my capacity to listen and to discern what I'm being told is sharper now. And being kind of perfectionistic, to me, it feels like the difference between 10%, 90% good, and maybe it's the difference between 90 and 95.
Right.
So
Right. That's what I'm saying.
maybe a bit of a distortion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because just for our own self-esteem and perfectionism stress, but also for those therapists out there who are at that stage and are thinking, my God, am I a complete idiot at this stage? And, it's sort of both and. It's like, yeah, you really don't know what you don't know. And you really have to appreciate that you're on a very, very long learning curve. At the same time, you probably are doing wonderful, helpful work. The old thing that we would hear, and it's a simplistic way of looking at it, but it's another thing to add, which is that they would find that the outcomes for noob therapists wasn't that different for seasoned. And one of the speculations was that, well, the noobs are more concerned about doing a good job because they're insecure, and so they pay more close attention, they work harder, and the seasoned people are more kind of set in their ways and they don't really listen as well. That's a speculation, of course, but so that's just another thing to add. But anyway, going on.
Yep.
But I also wanted to comment on the anonymous listener's phrasing here. So I just want to read this in its entirety. I've been on a few dates with a couple different therapists at the end of their grad program. Both of them have talked about how they actually don't care about their clients. Also, they've been super judgmental of others and surprisingly awful at conflict resolution. One demonstrated near delusional behavior and picked fights with several strangers for no reason. Okay, so both these people sound like psychopaths. They sound awful. I mean, if you just take it for what it is, they talked about how they actually don't care about their clients. Like these therapists are like, yeah, I don't care about any of my clients. I literally don't care about them. Like that's unlikely to me, but possible, I guess. And then they've been super judgmental of others. Okay, maybe that's you talking. Maybe you feel like they've been judgmental of you. And also surprisingly awful at conflict resolution, like you. Now, being a therapist doesn't mean you're a good person and doesn't mean you're good at conflict resolution at all. Yeah. But then the next line, one demonstrated near delusional behavior. What does that mean? Delusional behavior, like distorted behavior, and picked fights with several strangers for no reason. So, anonymous listener, if I take your description, then you are talking about two of the most awful people on the planet, regardless of them being a therapist, or you are distorted yourself. And I'm going to guess that it's somewhere in between there. I don't know where, but it's unlikely that you came across just two people, let alone two therapists, that are that evil and horrible as human beings. They sound like completely unhinged. Anyway, I understand that I may be attracting this type of personality, so I know this is not representative of all therapists. Still, it has sown doubt that my own therapist secretly has disdain for me. How, as a client, can you trust that your therapist actually cares? Yes, I'll talk to my therapist about it, but how can they actually demonstrate they care versus just putting on a show? Bob, what do you think?
Oh, well, I think you're maybe making a mistake when you're thinking about trust. Trust is not demonstrated, trust is given, right? Like we move in a direction toward trust of the other, if it's a therapist or a friend or a family member, whoever. Trust is me putting my faith in the other person to behave in a way that I think is predictable, like they're not going to be a dick to me, right?
But it's based on data.
Yeah.
You don't just give trust for no reason.
No. So if the therapist is behaving in ways that are good data points and they're fairly consistent, then it's delusional not to trust. That doesn't mean it's easy, but trust is what's given, not what's earned. So I have to give my trust. I have to take the risk. And if you're asking, how can I know for sure that it's going to be okay? You can't.
Right.
And that's just the thing. Like I'm just thinking about that corporate exercise, the trust fall. It is literally a fall. And if they don't catch you, you're on your ass. And you could be injured because you're supposed to be stiff as a plank and you're going to whack your head, right? If you do it right, you just let yourself be caught. That's an act of faith. There's no guarantee. And I imagine in the history of the trust fall, somebody's been dropped or stage diving.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what's going on with you, anonymous listener, between you and your therapist. You said you say you'll talk with your therapist about it, but it does raise a very frequent thing that I think about periodically because it's something that can become forgotten or neglected or habituated, or I don't know. It can become a habit for therapist and client to not look at this, to not recognize the elephant in the room or to ignore it or to rest on the laurels of previous conversations that you've had and to not revisit it. And it's something that things like this that'll provoke me to be like, let me think about how much trust is in my each relationship with each of my clients, and how much have I fostered it? How much have I talked about it directly? Am I keeping my eye on that ball as a therapist? And that's important because clients typically don't bring it up. And even if they do, they would probably not pursue it if I just said, of course I care about you. They'd probably just say, well, he said he cares, so I guess I'll just go with that. But that might not be enough. So it's really important that therapists think about it, perhaps broach it explicitly, but at the very least, orient at least part of your efforts toward this end. Like with clients, I might, in the next session, just think about my vibe, think about how they feel about me. Because, normally clients come in 99.99% of the time, they come into therapy talking about other people, other things, right? But the trust between the therapist and client is central and constantly in question to some extent. So the therapists, at least having their eye on the ball. Again, you can be explicit or not explicit about the conversation, but it's really important. And I find that when I remind myself and become more mindful of this with clients, not only do I think I'm a better therapist and serve the client in a very core manner, but I just feel better as a therapist. Honestly, it's grounding. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I'm thinking about my own therapist, and the way he often will start a session is something like, "We're here to pay attention to you with an attitude of interest and care and curiosity." And then he'll often ask, "Do you want us to?" And it's really interesting question, because I don't want to talk about what I want. I want it to just be sort of implicit, and to actually have to declare, "Yeah, I actually want you to care about me," or "I want us to pay attention to me," or "I want your attention," feels super freaking vulnerable. But what I've taken from that is that's how I start most of my sessions nowadays. And what I really like about it is making the implicit explicit. Like a client said to me recently, he's like, "In the very first time I met you, you're like, 'Do you want us to care about you?' And it made me so mad, because it's like, of course I want us to care about me. What are you talking about, right?" And it turns out that's actually a really useful question for me to consider, because I'm actually paying attention to and being plain about what I want, which turns out to have relevance for some other parts of their life So yeah. I think I might have fallen off a little bit of a tangent, but I do think that it's really important to be paying attention to what is the experience in the room of this relationship, including an element of trust or care or whatever it is. So I like that the person is saying they're going to talk about it, and I hope they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's take a break. Get back, another email. Back from the break. So we haven't done an OPP in a while, but I wanted to do some variation of that. So I, in front of me, have the whole list of all the patrons. And so
the whole list?
Well, it's the website, the Patreon, but give me a letter or a name even, and I'll do a search, and then we will sort the list by how long they've been a patron, and then we'll give a shout out. So a letter, or maybe 2 letters, or even just a first name or a last name.
Can we do a country, or is that it's not possible?
I don't know. Give me a country. Maybe I can.
New Zealand.
New Zealand. No. It doesn't, for whatever reason.
Okay.
Well, maybe I could do a filter by country.
Ooh.
No, I don't think so. Okay. I mean, I could download it, put it into Excel, blah, blah,
and
blah.
then, right. Yeah. Okay. Let's do last initial O.
Okay. Well, I just have to do O. It can't either. It just has to have the name O somewhere in their name.
All right.
But that's fine. So I will now sort the O's by lifetime membership amount, I think. And let me organize this. Okay. So at the top of the list, we have Taya Osinski. So Taya from Los Angeles, thank you so much for being a patron for so long.
I like that name.
Taya
Osinski.
Osinski.
Taya Osinski. The whole thing. She sounds like a superhero.
And then we have Olga from Carrollton, Texas. Thank you for being a patron for so long. And then we have Jason from UK, from Blackburn, UK, or Great Harwood, Blackburn, UK. I don't know which one of that is a county versus a city, but Great Harwood, Blackburn, that sounds like something from the Lord of the Rings or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah, Arthur,
Yeah.
King Arthur.
Oh, and then my good friend O'Donnell from Shoreline. She is a friend, a colleague, and a former student. And she has been a patron since the very beginning,
So let's see.
since 2015.
Woof.
So coming up on 10 years.
Golly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Then we have Patrick from God knows where. His last name seems Dutch to me, but who knows? And then we have Ellie from Santa Cruz. So to all of you, thank you so much for being a patron and having the letter O somewhere in your name. Ellie, where is the O in your name? I don't know. I put O into the search because, you got Taya Osinski,
Right.
and then you got Olga, and Jason, his last name has an O in it. O'Donnell.
Yeah.
Patrick has an O in his last name, but Ellie, I don't see any O. Maybe the O is in the last name, but we can't see it because
It's
we don't have
silent?
access. It's so silent. You don't even see it. All right, anonymous listener, annual long-term patron Natasha from California. Good old Natasha. She wrote in and says, "Hey, Kirk, I just wanted to say I was kind of embarrassed that I sent you a whole ranty email about how much I hate living in Seattle. LOL." So just chiming in. So I read an email from Natasha a while back in a solo episode about how she had moved up here to study, to be a therapist at Seattle U and living on Capitol Hill, and how she just didn't like the people or the city or anything. She says, "I'm kind of embarrassed that I sent you a whole ranty email. I think it took me a bit to adjust to living in Seattle, especially Capitol Hill, but I don't hate it. I will say that dating here is more difficult than anywhere else I've lived, but it's hard to pinpoint why. I think part of it," so just chiming in, I can't remember her email specifically, but I think there was at least an implication of like the Seattle freeze or something anyway. I think part of it is being very blue collar myself and moving here with an assumption that Seattle is filled with tons of feminist dudes, because but it's a problem for me in Seattle because the worlds of working class men and leftist principles don't really align. So I often feel like an anomaly, meaning that I'm both working class and leftist, which isn't really a thing, particularly in Seattle or something, and I could see that.
Yeah.
It seems that Joe Rogan and conservative ideals have infiltrated all the cis-het men in the world, but I suppose that's understandable considering it's a self-serving ideology to believe that the natural order of things just happens to be the one that places you at the top. Anyway, sorry if it seemed like I was coming at you in that email, Natasha, just chiming in here. It didn't seem like you're coming at me. At least I don't remember it being that way. I think I might have wondered if I had influenced Natasha to move up here or something. I don't know. And might have felt...
Did you?
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know.
Okay.
I can't imagine it being a huge influence because there's a lot of other factors that one would consider before moving to a city. You know what I mean?
A few folks, though, have moved because of you, haven't they?
Well, to say that they moved because of me is saying a lot. I have been the impetus to start looking into graduate schools in Seattle.
Okay. Yeah.
But, it's not like they just heard my podcast and packed their bags,
Have you ever had a listener show up in your class that you know of? Like that become a student of yours?
Yeah.
No shit.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
That's really cool.
Yeah. It is very cool. Not just that specifically, but you and I have inspired people to become therapists who weren't considering. There are people who were maybe putting it off or were kind of on the fence or something. But there are people who literally just, because of listening to the podcast for the first time in their lives, considered becoming a therapist and are today therapists.
Wow.
Yeah.
Trippy.
Trippy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I as a professor and mentor and supervisor, I'm used to that kind of role. And as someone who has had supervisor and professors and mentors, I also, that's just the way that this kind of profession works, I don't know, maybe all occupations have some of this, right? Some inspirational figure. There's also kind of the anti to that, Like I originally wanted to be in engineering, and then I talked with an engineer, or an engineer came to class and talked about what it was like to be an engineer, and I discovered that the general day-to-day 40 hours a week lifestyle of an engineer sounded extremely boring. You know, it's similar when it comes to psychological research. Like a lot of people will be like, "Ooh, I want to go into psychological research," because it sounds so exciting, right? You got to like discover things and research questions and answer things and talk about your research and write books and stuff. And you know, that's literally 0.001% of those who do research. You know, it's the professors at the top that have just been lucky to rise to that. Yeah, the vast majority of people doing research are just doing tedious data gathering on this very narrow question, perhaps for decades, and they're just happy that they have funding coming from somewhere and they don't have to, give up their mortgage or something. And it's similar in engineering too, that when you study physics and chemistry, you're just like, oh, that sounds so great. You know, you can like develop new materials and new compounds and save the world and create new energies and stuff. But then when you actually look at what an engineer, what a very, very typical engineer does, is they're in front of their computers just like doing this extremely tedious thing for a massive machine that is the engineering effort of a corporation, you know? So then I just picked business out of the blue, and I was like, I kind of like marketing, I guess. And so I had this brief moment of considering being like in advertising or something, because, you know, it sounds exciting. And then this actual advertiser came to class and talked about what it was like, and it just sounded horrible. He was like, you have to live, breathe, and, you know, everything advertising just to survive. And even then you'll probably burn out, because it's a highly competitive market. Especially if you're a creator of advertising, you know, if you're like the Don Draper of the world, you have to constantly come up with new and exciting ideas, and you're competing with other people, and you have to schmooze a lot, and it's very, very hard. So there's like an anti-version of that. You know, it's like you can have, I wonder if there's a word for it, like anti-mentor.
Like, an Antor.
Antor. All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself, and, you know, don't get down when you get shellacked while playing 13. It just means that you're bad at cards. And please take care of yourself, because
you deserve it.